Hello, and welcome to another episode of teissTalk with me, Jonathan Craven. It's lovely to have you all with us. Thank you for joining us, and a warm welcome to you wherever and whenever in the world you are this afternoon. A warm welcome also to those of you who are joining us via our LinkedIn live stream. A quick reminder that if you are joining us through the live stream, you will not be able, unfortunately, to ask any questions or make any comments during the episode. So if you want to join the conversation, and I wholeheartedly ask you to do so, hop over to the Teiss website so you can join in. As an added incentive, if you do join the conversation through Teiss website, we will be, myself and the Teiss elves will be reviewing those comments and questions as they go. And at the end of the episode, we will award that most sought after piece of crockery, the teissTalk mug. So there's an added incentive for you. So this week's episode, we're going to be looking at security effectiveness and how we can ensure that in our organizations. We've got a fabulous panel to discuss today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's panelists. We have Emmanuel Somona, the co-founder and CEO of Nagomi Security, Richard Absalom, the principal research analyst from the Information Security Forum, and Edward Starkey, director at GRC for Thomas Murray. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Special thanks to Emmanuel today as the sponsor of today's episode. Thank you so much for the tea and biscuits. We do appreciate it. So, gentlemen, we have circulated a news item. So the news item we're going to be talking about today is from Security Info Watch, and it's going to be popped into the chat as well. And this is about the cybersecurity tool sprawl and the cost of complexity. Now, as we said on our prep call previously, I love the phrase tool sprawl, and I shall be using it liberally from now on. But what it's talking about here is the number and complexity of tools that organizations are having, and I suppose it didn't come with a huge amount of surprise to me when they're saying small organizations average 20 tools, medium 60, and large enterprises 130 plus. It feels to me there's a risk of too much information. So what did you make of the article, guys?
Yeah. I'd say yeah, the first thing I'd kind of run into it seems to echo a lot of what we see amongst ISF members. There's too much to measure.
Yeah.
100. We work with large organizations, an average of 120 tools, 150 tools. How are you meant to report on the effectiveness of that to management? To me, that seems like there's too much to focus on.
Go for it, Edward.
Thank you. I was going to say, yeah, it's no surprise. It is a shame that, I mean, the numbers are staggering, right? 120 different tools. Absolutely incredible when you get to those kind of numbers. Yeah, I guess it kind of indicates the challenges that the industry have with understanding exactly what tools and capabilities that they're purchasing and kind of how they could be best leveraged. So yeah, it's definitely an eye-opener, but not necessarily a complete surprise.
Emmanuel.
Yes, I mean, the numbers speaks for themselves, and I think that it's also one of the signals we have for the industry, where we see that security hasn't been as effective as it should be, and there's too much inefficiencies. And what makes the problem even harder is that it's hard to measure security effectiveness, which just doesn't allow us to understand what do we have? Is it working as it should? Are we protected? Answering the questions that in other industries we have better ways of answering.
I thought what was also interesting was not just the sheer scale of the number of tools some organizations are using, but also the quote in there that most organizations are only utilizing 10 to 20% of the technology they own. So with constantly increasing costs and almost decreasing utility, it seems that not only are the numbers exploding, but the value that we're actually getting out of them is perhaps decreasing.
Yeah, I think that's common in a lot of life, right? So I know we spoke about this yesterday, but I'm sure I don't optimize everything that I own, and that's the reality. It's an uncomfortable reality, I'm sure, but 15 to 20%. I guess that's Yeah, I mean it is an incredibly small number. The underlying reasons as to why that's the case is definitely something that I'd love to unpick with you guys. I've got my own thoughts, but yeah, let's bounce it around.
Yeah,
I think
sounds a bit like it's the tail wagging the dog. Yeah, right. There's, are people buying solutions just because it's the easy thing to do rather than working out whether there's actually a problem or yeah, which problems do they have and which solutions meet them. Which goes back to all the issues we've seen around, measuring security. How do you know what to measure if you don't know what the question is or what the problem is in the first place? So I think yeah, there's probably a case there of buying a solution because it seems like the easy thing to do rather than actually solving the problem that you need it to.
Yeah, I think one of the quotes I have from a discussion I had about a year ago with one of our customers was, by buying another security tools, you're actually negatively impacting your security, because the increase of complexity actually reduces the ability of the security teams to be protected and effective. And so it's not only more tools does not equal more security. Sometimes more tools equals less security, which is obviously something that we're not used to in other industries.
It's a very counterintuitive prospect that you buy more things to make you secure and somehow you end up less secure.
I
Yeah.
agree, and I think it's if you think about it, we hear about something new happening. So you hear about something new in the threats. There is a new ransomware, or there is a new attack surface. You hear about AI. So you go and you ask yourself, what do I need to do? So the first thing is, well, let's think about that tool that can help us reduce the risk against it. By buying the tool, we increase complexity. The team doesn't grow. There is still talent shortage, and so forth. What happens there is we have misconfigurations and gaps, which then actually result in those breaches that mostly happen not because of that new tool and new attack surface, but actually by just not operationalizing what we already have in the most effective fashion. So that's kind of a vicious cycle that somehow we need to get out of.
Yeah, and it feels like it goes back to that. There's an original kind of governance and risk question here. So if you haven't got a full idea of, okay, how are we governing our security estate? What are our actual key risks and what are the main threats that impact us? How do we know which tools to to invest in? So if you're just investing every time a new threat comes up, then obviously, yeah, you're going to get tool proliferation, which is what we're seeing. So it feels like being able to shift left and do some of the harder work and think, at a kind of a large scale, what are the key risks we need to think about, and how do we measure against those? How do we measure those risks? How do we, put in the right controls? It's a good place to start. It sounds very simple. I know. I'm pretty sure it's not that simple.
It's all right. We have time to discuss it. Don't worry. And I think as well, you made the point, Emmanuel, about sort of the lack of integration and that just purely a proliferation of tools is perhaps counterproductive, because if you're just trying to, a lot of these tools aren't naturally compatible, and as you say, if we don't have growing teams to support these growing tool sets, then actually are some organizations making the problem worse for themselves?
Yeah, I think it's a problem that has actually two facets. The first one is what is the data that we have out of all of those tools, and how do we actually make them work together? So that's kind of a data problem, and it's been out there for a while. The second problem is, what does that data actually mean? So the problem is that we're managing usually security in verticals, and the questions we're asking or we're trying to answer are horizontal in nature. And a lot of the times, if you think about a security team and you ask them, well, are you protected against ransomware? As just a generic question, there is no clear playbook of how to defend against ransomware. You can go into many sources. There's always a bit of a difference, and it's also a changing thing. So even knowing what good looks like is actually something that is quite hard.
That's thank you. I mean, that kind of, for me, that kind of moves nicely into the topic for conversation today. So around hacking security effectiveness and making sure our tools are working for us. I think we've kind of, there seems to be a general consensus of opinion that this is a problem, and this is potentially a growing problem in this sort of arms race of a number of tools. So where do you guys think that this ever increasing number of tools and ever increasing amount of information is falling short in making us more secure. Edward, if I come to you first.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the statement itself, right? So, making sure the tools work for you. If you flip it on its head, there are many reasons why someone buys a tool, buys a widget. Everything from, I guess, pressure from the top, pressure from the bottom, boredom. I don't know, or just kind of a level of interest that stems from kind of owning and playing these things. So if you're purely looking at the is a tool working for you, if you think about perception is reality. Often you can buy a tool because it's the right thing to do from a perception perspective. It's the right thing to stand behind when you talk to the board. It's easy. So potentially, if you do get those uneducated stakeholders, buying an extra tool could be the right thing to do. If you've got the budget, if you've got the time, the space, the ability to do it, then why not? Potentially not necessarily the right answer from a security perspective, but if you're looking at it from a protecting your job, protecting, I guess, the perception of credibility of the team, then that's also worth considering. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of float that as an idea. I know it's not something that's necessarily considered or accepted.
I think a lot of organizations have inherited a lot of tools, and it's a very hard thing to actually, hey, let me remove something. Am I sure it's not going to reduce increase my risk against something? It's always easier to just pile up, because ultimately you're not kind of increasing the risk in any other areas. You're ultimately just making sure your strategy is somehow deployed. But we are kind of carrying this debt of something that is not being used, and it's very hard to remove. Sorry, Richard.
No, well, that just brought up, made me absolutely agree, thinking, yeah, there's so many companies we talk to, ask them how many tools they've retired that year, because, you've got these legacy tools, it'll be zero, right? So we're just constantly building up more and more tools, which is probably how we get into these numbers of 120, 150 tools per organization, just on the security side. I mean, so for me, to expand on it a bit as well, it goes back to some of our measuring security research. We kind of think, why we tell people to go back and ask the stakeholders, what is it you're interested in? What do you need to know? What value do you require from security? And if a tool can't help answer that, then you have to ask, okay, why have we got it in the first place? But to Edward's point, there's a really good point there. We've implemented this because we think you want it, which might be the answer to a board member or another stakeholder. But for me, that's not necessarily a good answer. The key thing is to have good conversations with whoever your stakeholders are, whether it's the board, whether it's application owners, marketing teams, whoever looks after the public facing website. And think, okay, what do you actually need from security? What do you need to know from us to make sure the business remains resilient, that we're able to continue operating, continue functioning, and work out, okay, which tools are going to help us do that, and then how do we measure the effectiveness? Are those tools actually helping us to remain effective and secure?
So to build on Emmanuel's point, one of the problems with proliferation for me seems that there is this deep-seated sort of misconception that you can't end of life a security tool because for fear of or what might happen if, and maybe that's sort of a mindset that generally the industry needs to change, is saying, and I appreciate from vendors' perspective, they really don't want you to do that because they don't like you end of lifing their tools. But at the end of the day, is saying there is that tool was bought to meet that particular need at that particular time, and that need may no longer exist.
Yeah, I think to that point, think about something we've heard a lot in the last 18 months called consolidation. We've been talking about it. But first of all, the consolidation play is coming from the big vendors. So it always sounds something very commercial. Yeah, you want to consolidate with vendor A or vendor B. And the second thing is that no one actually gave any tools for companies to actually think about it. Well, how can I consolidate? Am I really willing to give up my best of breed solutions? Right? I really want to have the best ADR. I really want to have the best network solution, but I still want to consolidate. How do I do that? And lastly, even when consolidating, we find a lot of times that there is a lot of complexity between tools of suite of tools that those bigger vendors have. So it doesn't even solve that complete problem on its own.
Yeah.
The best in Sorry, Richard.
There you go.
I was going to say the best in breed is such an interesting term. Like, if you say, you know, what best in breed, that means so many different things to so many different people. Everybody in security has a view or a perception or an understanding of what they like and a preference. I know this is definitely something that I'm quite passionate about. But if you think about the churn in this space, you're constantly getting new team members in, and they'll introduce kind of new ideas and new perceptions and new understandings of technologies, and then you've got the research houses that will offer a view and an opinion on which is the best tool. And yeah, I think there's an element of understanding how those work. Potentially, you know, the whole pay to play and seeing the value that the organizations can get from those. But yeah, the turnover, the churn, individual preference is absolutely fundamental. I think the average tenure of a CISO, it's far below that of someone that's a head of HR or head of finance. It's a more unstable role where you're expected to make an impact in a short period of time, and you'll naturally veer towards things that you're familiar with.
We're basically finding, sounds like we're getting to a point. So we've got new CISOs coming in every, I think the average tenure is 3 years. So the tool coming in 3 years, in line with vendors updating their tools every couple of years, or new things coming out, new threats emerge, new technologies. I've seen AI mentioned in the chat, so I think I can get away with now being the first to mention it in the discussion. But yeah, obviously AI-based tools coming through. So we kind of get to a point where, yeah, no one wants to retire anything, and every new leader feels like they need to make a mark. But it goes back to that kind of fundamental issue I think I mentioned at the beginning, like, what does our risk look like? No, what is the threat landscape currently, and do the tools that we have actually meet that? So do some of our legacy tools actually really do they move the needle in terms of mitigating the risk that we now face? It needs constant review, I guess, and maybe it's a resource issue a lot of the time. We know, organizations tend to be short-staffed, always, wanting more budget, etc., and you just can't keep a track on matching the the threat landscape to the control landscape. It's not an easy task.
That's certainly one of the problems, I think, with the tool proliferation, is that the teams don't grow at the same rate that the number of tools does. And indeed, Hendrik in the chat has made that comment that he's made the suggestion sometimes sticking to a proven set of security tools and applying normal intelligence can be more effective for ensuring security. And I would largely agree with that point. I think it's actually, to a certain degree, going with what you know and it works can prove very, very effective. So if we are in this space where we know vendors are always going to push new tools, we have CISOs that there is quite a frequent turnover of them, and they tend to have their flavor of the month tool, so they may want to bring something in wherever they go, whether or not it exists already. We've got a lot of churn in the team members themselves, and maybe the teams aren't growing. In some cases, if you're really unlucky, they're shrinking, and you've got to try and manage a bigger estate and a bigger suite of tools. So it seems fairly obvious that this is it's not quite the perfect storm, but it's not a great situation for a lot of businesses to be in. So if we can break it back, sort of like take a step back from that situation and say, what are we doing? What should we be doing to sort of re-baseline, if you will, and start that conversation again? Like, Richard, you were making points about sort of having the understanding about risk and sort of starting again. So what do you think?
I think that the research I've done would say it's go back to your stakeholders and ask, like I said, what do you care about? Why are we measuring something? What are the tools that well, actually no, but don't even talk about tools, talk about their issues. So what's their key concern? What are they looking after? So yeah, as I said, if it's whoever's looking after the website, I need to know it's got 99.99% uptime. If it's the board want to know we have an adequate security posture, to against our risk appetite. So there's a kind of a range of different questions they'll have that will evolve over time, right, as business strategies change. So it's having having a relationship and understanding what the business drivers are before going, okay, what tools do we have that can, mitigate the risk and provide value to the business. So I think I said at the beginning, there's too many things to measure, right? If you're a small IT organization or an infosec team and you've got 120 tools, well, it's a large organization and a relatively small team. How do you choose what to report upwards on? Because again, you can look at effectiveness and stuff. There's no point in measuring any of this if it doesn't get reported upwards, if it doesn't lead to some kind of action or agreement on, yes, we're going in the right direction or we need to spend more on this. So yeah, do that prioritization exercise first. Really understand kind of where the business priorities are and work out what what story you can tell. In relation to the effectiveness of the tools that you have at your disposal.
There's potentially an element of, is this reflective of kind of broader technology generally across the business, where the technology is added on top of existing tech stacks rather than being kind of retired. And if the cyber function is providing the service to the business and having to protect additional technology stacks, and potentially there's the element of articulating to the business the security impact of not decommissioning existing technology, not just cyber tooling, but the broader impact of, if a business wants to do this, then there'll be an implication from a cost and effort perspective within the cyber team. But I think you're right, Richard. A lot of the time, it just comes back to those conversations with business stakeholders and being able to, ask the 5 whys. Go back to fundamental principles of CIA, looking at kind of data, assets, all the way down the tech stack and almost mapping it out. I'm a big fan of understanding exactly what you've got in place, and the capability that it provides you. And I think veering away from referencing tools and buzzwords and going, principles, fundamentals is absolutely critical. I know we spoke yesterday, and Biro is a rollable pen. We need to make sure that doesn't happen within security. We need to make sure that a vendor doesn't have, that doesn't, I guess, become blurred with vacuum cleaner and Hoover and all that kind of stuff, because there's a risk it will.
I'd agree with all that. The one thing, well, apart from one thing, I guess, when you're talking with the board, or depending on the stakeholder, you've got to address their concerns, right? So I wouldn't get into talking about tech stacks and vulnerabilities and tools at the board level, right? They've got very high level questions like, are we secure enough? That question, are we secure, is a horrible one. So let's talk. How do we get them to ask more answerable questions like, do we have an adequate control framework? They won't necessarily want to know about the detail. You'll need to know about it to be able to answer that question. But yeah, it's kind of understanding the audience you're talking to, what they're primarily interested in, and then what else you need to go and find out to answer their questions to measure that effectiveness.
Exactly. I think exactly to your point, a lot of organizations they need to decide, do you want to be compliant for security? Do you want to drive for maturity? Today I'm low maturity, I want to be medium or high, or actually want to be protected. And when you say protected, or you want to increase your resilience against what? One of the things that if you think about the tool sprawl, is we've been spraying around controls all over the environment. Some of them stick, some of them don't. The issue is that the time it takes us to select a tool, to deploy it, to operationalize it, takes so much time. Obviously, on the flip side, on the threat landscape, we see the changes being much, much faster. And I think that what we're seeing today, that is kind of an initiative that I'm hearing from a lot of organizations, is actually thinking from, like you said, Richard, from the risk standpoint, but even being more specific from the threat landscape standpoint. If you pick on the threats or the adversaries you're trying to defend against, and you can say, listen, against those adversaries, I'll aim to be really effective, and I'm going to measure myself against it. Do we all agree that this is what we're trying to mitigate? If we are, we can really tune our investments and also the effectiveness of those tools, and also then decide maybe we have overlaps and redundancies in our stack of controls. Because otherwise, with compliance, we can find ourselves just adding more and more and more tools, and it's much more of a yes/no question rather than effectiveness and performance question.
I think it's used some basic frameworks as well around that. So, for instance, we found with the board, for example, the NIST CSF pillars really work. So, you know, they don't care what tools you use, but you can say this is how good we are at detecting, you know, at reacting or responding, at identifying and preventing threats. So it's like kind of focus at that level, and then, you know, provide, if you're able to provide an effectiveness score, okay, this is how good we think we are at identifying threats. And we've, you know, if anyone asks, you want to be able to have the detail to say, okay, these are the kind of threats we identify. These are the tools we have that allow us to do it. And, you know, they're effective because they show us X number of near misses, for example, or or incidents identified, or, you know, number of attacks. They're all kind of levels of detail lower than the board might expect, but they want to have an overall higher picture. And if you can break it down into language or terms they understand to start with, then it kind of makes everything that much easier. So yeah, we've just found that those, and they've added governance to CSF and SCSF, but the 5 pillars as it was really did, for some reason, just resonate. So that's a good starting point.
I think we're in a much better position today in the industry, exactly to your point, because I think that we've run a big survey, and over 50% of CISOs were reporting to the board at least once a year. Most of them were reporting even more, like at least once a quarter. This wasn't the case, I think, 10 or 15 years ago. And the second thing is, we have in a lot of boards, especially in Fortune 500, at least one member that has cybersecurity, experience of some sort. So it allows us to shift away from buzzwords to something that is a bit more focused. Of, you know, the boards also need to be able to ask the right questions. Otherwise, it becomes a very technical discussion, which people just don't understand. And to your point also on the risk, once we think about cybersecurity as a risk thing, we need, as an industry, but also as organizations, we need to understand that there's never going to be zero risk. So now the question is, which risk are we willing to accept? And what does it mean? And what's that exposure? And that's something that we're actually hearing the transition right now, which I think is a good thing, because we're hearing the right questions being asked.
Yeah, and it's absolutely great. And it takes time to get to those questions, right? You have to start somewhere. You generally won't have a fully top-down approach where the board tells you exactly what they need to know, and they're all brilliantly insightful questions. There's an education process of, you know, trial and error of, okay, are we answering the right thing? Are we still trying to measure the right thing? And then it's good to hear, you know, from your survey that it seems that we're getting to that point, you know, in general across the industry. Obviously, every organization is different, but yeah, there's no quick answers to any of this, I think, is the point. It's a bit of a journey. You're going to have to constantly work at it and even if you start to think you're doing it well, and by the way, I haven't met anyone who says, yeah, we're doing this really, really well, we've got nothing to improve. That even if you're doing it fairly well, you need to keep on going, essentially, keep iterating, keep updating, keep up to times with whatever your organization wants.
Edward.
I think, and conscious that I'm on a call with information security professionals. I think as a profession, we've got a lot to. We should shoulder a lot of the blame in this space, for a number of different reasons. Whether it's not being able to articulate the value and the risk and all that kind of stuff with board members, that's one thing. The second thing is with like basic business principles around cost management, understanding what your costs are within a team, and proportioning effort in a way that directly aligns to kind of business objectives and supporting business objectives. Because there is an element of short-termism within information security. There's a very, very strong focus on technology, often at the expense of overlooking the people and the processes that are required to support it. So that's the other piece, I guess. Understanding that if you purchase a new tool, there is a cost, but equally there's a cost associated with training and actually accessing the tool and spending time looking at it. That is, you know, that takes up time, and that is a cost. So there's part of that as well. Like, I guess part of it is we operate in isolation a lot of the time. We don't talk the language of business. And that's something that I think we need to look long and hard at ourselves because that's on us, right? We don't ask other parts of the business to talk exclusively in their technical language, and the business should understand it. I get that everybody needs to have educated stakeholders, and it's up to us to educate them. But at the end of the day, we need to talk in a way that business understands, and it's risk and numbers, and I think increasingly more so numbers. So, yeah, part of this is looking long and hard at individuals within the profession and making sure that technical capability isn't just, it's more than being technically capable now. I think to be a CISO, you need to be financially literate. You need to be kind of business laser focused on the business and being able to communicate in a way that perhaps traditionally we haven't done. So yeah, I'm just going to throw that in the ring and say, look, it's all our fault.
I mean, I think I wholeheartedly agree about the shouldering some of the responsibility, because I think, as you say, historically we're not necessarily the most articulate of groups of individuals when it comes to talking about anything other than technology. So I'd wholeheartedly agree. I think also, I think what I'm getting this kind of general consensus of opinion that in terms of these conversations between the CISO and the board is actually they almost need to be tool agnostic, because the moment you start bringing the technological specifics into it, it actually can get very partisan. Whereas actually, to your earlier point, Richard, if you're talking about security concepts and what you want and what good should look like for you as an organization, then you're talking about something which is a little bit more abstract. But then I think then it also takes you on to the next step, which is, okay, now we know what we want our security to be. What tools can provide that? And I think that's sort of the next thing about, for me, is how do we go about making sure we have got the right tools? So let's take ourselves to the promised land and go, we've had these really, really productive conversations with the board. How do we go out and get those right tools?
So I just want to, I was going to say, I really kind of agreed with what Edward was saying about the people and process side of things being important as well here. It's almost like, if we can focus too much on the effectiveness of tools.
Sure.
If we're not, we absolutely need to talk about the concept and whether you're bringing, whether people are demonstrating secure behaviors enough, if you're showing enough education around the organization is just as important as do we have the right technical controls in place. Often, I'd say probably more important. I think if you haven't got the right culture, it's so hard to do anything strategically around security, as there's always going to be humans.
Yeah, well, the right tool is not necessarily the right tool in a vacuum.
Yeah,
the right tool has to be, does it fit your policy and procedure structure? Does it fit your staff sort of culture? So the right, I think the phrase "the right tool" is actually a movable feast in and of itself.
Yeah. So so to your question, that should remind me of the question, but it was, what can we actually do about this? Is
how do we go to market? Having had these kind of more abstract conversations and understanding what we want what our risk appetite is as a business, what we think our security stance should be, how do we go about probably looking through our legacy tooling and go, yeah, that's right, that isn't, that's right, that isn't, but also going and getting new things.
To say that first.
Emmanuel.
So I think that one of the best practices that we've been hearing, and also trying to be kind of in a positive note of giving some ideas also to the crowd, I think that we, especially for risk-based type of organizations that are trying to mitigate specific risks and are being already starting to transition against, reducing risk against whatever threat they're trying to reduce the risk against, is it's ransomware or whatever that may be. One of the things that we've saw organizations do is they're trying to understand which capabilities they actually need to defend against the specific threats. And one of the positive notes of proliferation in the industry in the last 3-5 years has been the MITRE ATT&CK framework that allows us to take the attacker's perspective in mind. And what we've seen organizations do is they're trying to take capabilities and really map them to each and every one of those techniques that they're trying to defend against. And then backwards going and saying, okay, well, which capability am I actually getting from those tools? So they want to move away from tools. They want to move into capabilities of actually understanding what I have. And they want to be able to take a threat lens, which says, well, I can't defend against all of those techniques in a very effective way, because that would be too expensive. So I need to kind of minimize and focus on this subset of techniques where I really want to be strong at and effective. And the third one is I want to make sure that I understand what's the gaps I have and perhaps what's the overlaps and redundancies that I have. And that's kind of been a process that we've seen a lot of organizations going through, albeit manually for now, but they've tried to do it, which is already, I think, a step in the right direction.
I think in addition to that, one good way of addressing it might be to take an asset or process-based approach. So I understand, okay, what are our critical processes? What are our critical assets? Prioritize them by, yeah, are they mission critical? Literally, what's the minimum viable business look like, down to, okay, these are, entirely unconfidential, not particularly important. And map through, okay, how do we, once we've got that prioritization done, once we understand the risks and the threats against those assets and processes, have we got the right controls in place? So it's having that prioritization in the first place and then mapping it to the controls, the tools, the policies, the processes that you have. So that could be one way of looking at it. Again, it depends on the business, how big you are, but there can obviously be a lot of different processes and assets to map against at that point. But I think the main point is, don't let the tail wag the dog. Like, you start with the, okay, where's the value? What are our processes? What's our risk? And map to the controls and the tools from there.
Edward?
Yeah, I just kind of a big fan of MITRE when it comes to this. Understanding whether it's MITRE attack and then MITRE defend and all of that kind of good stuff. I think it's a useful tool for many different, and by tool I mean kind of framework. It's a useful framework because I think once you get your head around it, it's quite simple. It's quite simple to understand. Doing stuff like providing a heat map over the top of the MITRE framework is fantastic. It's really useful to be able to say, look, here's a threat actor, here's the TTPs that they use, here's it mapped to a framework. Oh, look, and we're covered 80%, 90%, and be able to articulate that. That's, really, really good. The other stuff is, and maybe this is beyond the scope of this particular conversation, but looking at risk quantification and understanding the impact of procuring a new tool or giving up a tool and the associated costs. But in order to do that, you need to be financially literate and you need to be able to capture all of the costs associated with running of a tool. And so there's kind of additional steps that you could do, but ultimately there's a lot of hard work that needs to be done by professionals prior to procuring anything. And understanding what you've got is the hardest thing. It's the most simple thing to talk about. Have an effective asset register. Great. That is one of the most fundamental principles of any IT function, let alone cyber. But that's incredibly difficult. So to do that from a security tooling perspective and then take it a step further and understand the capabilities that fall off the back of that's a lot of legwork that I guess, to be quite honest, people don't want to do. It's far easier to go and buy something because it's whizzy and shiny.
So are we sort of saying that the stark reality of it is, if you want to buy the right tools, that you've got to do a certain amount of legwork before you actually even put your hand in your pocket to go and buy a tool. You just need to, as you say, understand what your estate is, understand what you're trying to secure, make sure you're asking the right questions and can answer the right questions before you start signing checks.
I think so.
Yeah, I think you have to.
And this understanding, there's a short-term cost there in terms of the work you need to do, but over the long term, that should be far more efficient and reduce the amount of work you have to do at a later point, right? So it's kind of putting the effort in early to see the benefit down the line, which, yes, to Evan's point, can be a hard sell when you got a short tenure, and there's people demanding results straight away. But yeah, maybe that's another discussion to have with the board and with governance bodies, saying that we need to put this work in now. This is a long-term plan. We promise. We hope you'll see results over the coming years.
I think we're probably at one of the peak moments, at least in history that I remember, but obviously that's just my memory, of organizations that are trying to rationalize their stack of controls. They're trying to actually figure out. And one of the reasons that they're doing it is they're going to the CFO or to whatever their committee for buying new tools, and they're asking them a simple question. Well, you bought that tool last year. Is it properly utilized? Like, are you getting everything you need out of it? Simple question, really hard to answer. They're asking them, well, just let me know before you go and buy it, another bunch of security tools. And I think that that is actually creating a positive momentum, which is rationalizing, making sure that they're buying the right things. And perhaps soon thereafter, we'll hear about, hey, we're starting to remove debt from the organization. So I haven't seen that removal yet happen, but I think we will start seeing it in the next year or two coming up, especially in those large enterprises that have the 120 or 30 security tools. I don't think they can manage so much.
I guess the other piece here is the 80/20 rule. That still applies. So, how much time do you want to spend optimizing, like fully optimizing existing tool sets or existing, cyber tech, I guess, cyber tech stack. I know we mentioned yesterday about Excel. Excel could do wonderful things. Do you always need it to be super duper whizzy, or sometimes you just need it to be a calculator? That's the reality, right?
Yeah.
So understanding what you really need from those tools. But again, it harks back to Handsome Richard's comment about talking to your stakeholders. It's very much an in-joke. Apologies for everyone.
Yeah, we'll have to clarify that one later.
It's for the chat or something, don't worry. So I think as we are drawing to a close, let's end on a high note. And I think we've talked about a lot about the fact that there is this huge proliferation, and a lot of teams, a lot of organizations are going to struggle with these kind of things. So let's try and end on a positive. So for each of you gents, give me one thing that anybody listening can take away with them and actually start to implement tomorrow. And let's try and be as brief as possible. So 60 seconds each. So if I can come to you first, Emmanuel.
Thanks. So I think I will actually say three things. The first thing is make sure you get the basics right. You have the tools, make sure they're actually working as they should across coverage, across effectiveness. Then make sure you're taking a threat-centric approach, which means you're actually defending against the threats you care about and not compliance-based or just against anything you hear about. And the third one is actually measure the effectiveness, because it will allow you to actually check, are you doing actually a good job? So it's hard, but crossing that chasm and actually starting to measure security effectiveness helps a lot in understanding where do we have gaps and what we should be doing about them.
Thank you. Edward.
Go and have a conversation with your stakeholders. That'd be my
You didn't need 60 seconds.
Yeah, we tend to veer towards technology so often, but
Sure.
the reality is just go and have a chat with them, understand what their requirements are. And not just business stakeholders, but also the team. If you can stop excessive churn within your team, it addresses some of this problem. Look after your people, and your people look after you. So yeah, be friendly. Go and have those conversations.
Lovely. And Richard.
Yeah, Edward nicked my point there. So, but yeah,
Apologies.
absolutely same. But to agree, to build on that as well, it's about building relationships. So yes, have conversations. But you made a point earlier, Emmanuel, about kind of CISOs now reporting more regularly to the board, and I think especially at that level, it's actually what's more important is that not just the reporting and not just the meeting and the formal setting. It's everything that happens before and after and outside it. So go and get allies, build relationships, put the effort into to make friends and influence people. We're talking about measuring effectiveness of security controls, which sounds like an incredibly technical topic, but actually when it's all going to come back to soft skills and communication and building relationships with people to understand what they need to know. So start there.
Lovely. Well, I think on that bombshell, that's absolutely fantastic. Is we're talking about how to make your tools more effective, and we're saying, well, don't worry about tools, go and talk to people, and I'm all in favor of that. So thank you, gentlemen. Really, really, really enjoyed that conversation. I hope all of you out there did too. It all remains for me to say is join Tom Langford next week for the next episode on the 3rd of April, which is about resilient by design, the next cybersecurity imperative. I would like to thank my panelists, Emmanuel Salmona, Richard Absalom, and Edward Starkey. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your input. Thank you all very much for listening. And when it comes to cybersecurity, let's keep talking. Thank you.